Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, you know how it is. I like to start things off with a story. Let us see if I can do that this morning. Once upon a time, isn't that the way stories start? Once upon a time, about 1 a.m. on a Christmas morning, a very tired minister was on his way home. He had just finished conducting a midnight Christmas Eve service at the mission near the docks on the seamy side of town. Now, it wasn't safe to be in that neighborhood at that time of night, and so he was hurrying along when all of a sudden he came upon 4 little boys who were dragging a great big bag through an alley. "What are you boys doing down there?" he asked them. And assuming they were up to some kind of mischief, he added, "Don't you children know that if you do that, old Santa Claus won't come to see you tonight?" To which the smallest and perhaps the brightest of the little fellows looked up and said to the minister, "Well, who do you think we've got in this bag, mister?" Santa is coming. Well, here it is, almost Christmas. And everywhere that you look, you see pictures of Jesus and of Santa. And not only of Santa, but of Santa's elves and his reindeer, his sleigh, and his bag of presents. Well, how come? Isn't the birth of Jesus supposed to be the reason for the season? Well, no, not entirely. For things are much more complicated than that. If his birth were the only thing about Jesus that really mattered, then you and I probably would never have heard of him. And nor would anyone else. And we wouldn't be celebrating Christmas. There have been, as you have already heard, many other people whose births were supposedly miraculous, and some of them too were hailed as the sons or the daughters of one deity or another. And yet, we don't much honor them anymore. But people all over the world still celebrate Christmas, and not just Christians. Millions of people who don't believe Christianity's metaphysical claims concerning Christ nevertheless put up Christmas trees, exchange presents, and honor both Jesus and Santa in various ways. Well, why? Because both Jesus and Santa represent something that is absolutely essential to human existence. They both symbolize the spirit of generosity. Now, the connection between generosity and Santa is pretty obvious, I suppose, but you may never have thought about Jesus in terms of generosity. And the reason for that may be that you may have misunderstood what he had to say about love. In a 1994 movie, Forrest Gump declared, "I'm not a smart man, but I know what love is." Now, most people, especially Christians, think that they know what Jesus meant by love. And yet scholars have shown repeatedly for 200 years that they really don't. Because the kind of love that the man of Nazareth talked about is not at all what most people mean when they speak about love. As you know, Jesus was a Jew, and he spoke Aramaic. But when the church preserved his oral teachings and writing, they used Greek. Now, as confusing as that was in some ways, it was also clarifying in several others, and love is one of the best examples. Because unlike modern English, ancient Greek had several words to describe different kinds of love. One of those words was eros, from which we get our word erotic. Now, eros is a form of love in which one person who is lower in status, weaker in power, and less important than someone else seeks out a relationship with someone else who is superior, stronger, and more influential. The former person feels incomplete and insecure and tries to become fulfilled and safe by loving the latter person. Such love manifests itself in romantic and erotic and sexual ways. That was not the kind of love that Jesus taught. Another Greek term for love was philia. In this variety, equals seek each other out for companionship and for mutual benefit. And this is often referred to in English, as you well know, as brotherly love. Indeed, Philadelphia is called the city of brotherly love because that is what its name literally means. Now, philia does appear in the New Testament. In Hebrews 13:1, for example, let brotherly love continue. But such warm and emotional friendship was not the kind of love that Jesus taught. A third Greek term for love was agape. Prior to Christianity, agape was not highly esteemed at all. It appeared only once in ancient Greek literature. It was nevertheless the word that the New Testament authors chose to represent the distinctive type of love which Jesus taught. Agape appears in various forms in every book of the New Testament. It is mentioned over 350 times and is even used to define deity, as in 1 John 4:7-8, which says, God is love. Now, Jesus adopted and adapted ideas about love from Judaism. Chief among these was the double command that you may know, which said, you shall love Yahweh your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And you shall love your neighbor, your neighbor as yourself. Before Jesus, these two commands were generally considered to be separate and independent things. And yet he brought them together and he gave them equal value. And with this change, Jesus began to redefine the meaning of love. Jesus also changed the focus of love from its object, the beloved, to its subject, the lover. While Judaism spoke often about loving one's neighbor, just who constituted a neighbor was never very clear. Indeed, there were complex rules for defining neighbor. These included blood relations, kinds of friendships, and physical distances between people. Neighbor was never understood to mean just anybody, anywhere, anytime. Some people were always excluded, and who they were changed depending upon circumstances. Jesus rejected such exclusivism. When asked to define neighbor, he told the parable of the Good Samaritan. You know it. It tells us that a traveler was robbed and beaten and left for dead, and people who should have helped him passed the victim by without stopping. But a hated member of a different race and religion did stop and did help. It was this generous Samaritan whom Jesus designated as being the real neighbor. By defining neighbor as anyone who helps someone else, as Gary said you all together did the other night, Jesus further modified the meaning of love. Yet a third nuance appeared in Jesus' view of love. Whereas eros and philia depend upon the lover receiving something in return from the beloved, no such reciprocity exists in agape. As did most religious leaders, Jesus taught the golden rule. You know it probably in these words, whatever you wish that men would do to you, do so to them. But when it came to loving people, Jesus went beyond this ethic of reciprocity. As the parable of the Good Samaritan shows, as his statements such as lend, expecting nothing in return, show, And as the fourth element I'm about to declare, show Jesus' version of love was expanding what had gone before. Now that fourth element was his extraordinary command, love one's enemies. That was virtually unheard of at that time. The reason behind it was just as unusual. The reason was impartiality. Jesus wanted his disciples to be like his heavenly Father, who, the Scriptures tell us, made his sun to rise upon the evil and upon the good, and who sent rain upon the just and upon the unjust. Now, many of us are not much concerned about the impartiality of possibly mythical deities, but there is not a single person in this room who is ignorant of the terrible harm that discrimination and prejudice cause in this world today. And so, quite apart from all theology, none of us can pretend to be in any doubt whatsoever about the life-enhancing value of any form of love that is based upon impartiality. Now, all of this means that agape, which Jesus taught, was not some kind of meek and mild Casper milquetoast friendliness. Not at all. Nor was it anything at all emotional. It had nothing to do with the heart. It had everything to do with the head. It was a premeditated, carefully thought out, calculating approach to life which sought to treat every person equally, no matter what amount of personal sacrifice might be required. Now, if what I am describing to you sounds strange, and if you don't recall having seen very much of it, well, I'm not surprised, for agape is rare upon this earth. Most people are afraid to live agapeically because they are scared of the consequences that might arise if, in fact, they treated all races equally, if they shared their wealth with those overcome by poverty, if they had to step out from behind their defensive shields of bigotry, pride, nationalism, or sometimes their arrogant and anti-intellectual self-righteousness so often seen in forms of religious piety. Now, as for other types of love, eros is wonderful. It is the spice that most often enlivens our lives, but eros does not solve the problems of this world. Indeed, when eros predominates, and especially if it gets out of control, as it often does, it magnifies our difficulties. Philia also is splendid. Without the warmth and affection of philia, life would not be worth living. But it is just not possible to like everyone. We cannot feel affection for the thief, the rapist, the murderer, the sociopath, the terrorist, the child molester, the bigot, the chauvinist, or the homophobe. Indeed, it would be immoral for us to have sympathy for them. Philia cannot motivate our conduct in relation to evil people. And yet relate to them, we must. Our very lives and safety depend upon it. And so for us to do so, there must be some other form of love. And that love is the agape that Jesus taught. It is warm-hearted and yet tough-minded love. Its non-emotional approach of impartial rationality is what is called for if we are to overcome hatred and prejudice and violence. Its method of loving even the unlikable enemy, of giving help without expecting anything in return, of treating all persons equally, is an approach that combines peace and charity and democracy. Now, we do not need to be Christian to acknowledge the profundity of agape. It transcends Christianity. It is a kind of love that can and must be, I think, practiced universally by all people everywhere if we are to survive and to thrive on this planet together. Now, precisely such love, if you think about it, is also what Santa Claus represents. Just look at what Santa does. Santa shares what he has with people who have not. He doesn't do this impulsively or emotionally without thought. He makes up lists, remember? But he does do it to the extent that he is able. And he gives to each person something that he or she needs or wants. And moreover, Santa does this impartially. He gives to each and every home some kind of present, so that all people, regardless of their race or religion or nationality, come away with something. And finally, though he may really enjoy the milk and the cookies some folks leave out, Santa never requires nor expects anything in return for his gift. Such warm-hearted yet tough-minded thinking and sharing is very much the agape which Jesus taught. If we dismiss it as mere generosity, then we have not truly understood it, and we have not yet understood what it means to have a generous spirit. If you read the great philosophers, as I have done, because I have taught them over the years, you will find that almost all of them recognized generosity to be a virtue. Descartes, for example, believed that it was the source of all the virtues. And he said if generosity were absolute and universal, there would be no need of justice. But like agape, generosity is rare upon this earth. Contemporary French philosopher André Comte-Sponville writes the following: generosity, he says, is so great and vaunted a virtue simply because we are so lacking in it. Because our selfishness always wins out. Because generosity is usually conspicuous only in its absence. Generosity, he says, is the opposite of selfishness, of hate, contempt, envy, anger, indifference. It is, he says, the combination of magnanimity and liberality which raises us up towards others and away from our own pettiness and egotism. When we combine generosity with other virtues, he says, it becomes even greater. He gives examples. When we combine it with courage, it becomes heroism. With justice, it becomes equity. With compassion, benevolence. With mercy, leniency. With gentleness, it becomes kindness. Generosity, he says, is the virtue of giving money or giving of oneself. But then he points out, we can only give what we possess, and only on condition of not being possessed by what we possess. And because of this, Descartes wrote the following. He said, those who are generous are naturally led to do great deeds because they esteem nothing more highly than doing good to others, and disregarding their own self-interest, they are always perfectly courteous, gracious, and obliging to everyone. Moreover, he said, they have complete command over their passions. In particular, they have mastery over their desires and over jealousy and envy. These exalted words were once very simply exemplified by the great pianist Paderewski. A mother, wishing to encourage her young son's progress on the piano, took him to a Paderewski performance. Now their seats were near the front of the concert hall. The mother began to talk to another member of the audience and got very involved with that. And it was only when the lights dimmed and the spotlight illuminated the stage that she realized her son had slipped away. And in fact, was up there plinking out, twinkle, twinkle, little star on the Steinway. Now, before she could react, the master appeared and came on stage. And instead of being angry and ordering the boy back to his seat, Agape whispered in his ear, "Don't quit. Keep playing." Leaning over the child, he reached down with his left hand and began filling in the bass part. And then his right arm encircled the boy, and Agape added a running legato. And together, the old master and the young novice held that audience mesmerized to the end of the piece. That was generosity of spirit. In his book, Say Please, Say Thank You, The Respect That We Owe One Another, Donald McCullough has a chapter entitled Developing a Generous Spirit. And in it he writes this: "When you offer any gift, whether money or time or patience or forgiveness or anything else of value, you demonstrate respect for another person. You say, in effect, I'm giving you something of value because you are of value." This is why courteous people, those who take seriously the dignity of others, tend to be generous people. And that means, he says, that not only is generosity a virtue, it is also very much a part of our own Unitarian Universalist first principle. Think about that. Now, how do we develop such a spirit of generosity in ourselves and in our children or grandchildren? Well, the first step, I think, is to acquire an attitude of gratitude. It is not only on the calendar, you see, that Christmas follows Thanksgiving. It is also a fact of life in general, because usually it is only after people recognize that all of the many blessings that they have, that they are able to share with others. And gratitude are blessings thus shared. A second good step is for us to remember what Jesus said about love. Agape is the spirit of generosity that this world needs if it is to welcome and become a better place for all people. And as I explained earlier, however, Jesus' teaching is hard enough for adults to understand, and it is much more so difficult for children. And so a third step would be to approach them in a way that was suited to their level of emotional and intellectual development, and therein lies the value of Santa Claus. Whether told as fact or fiction, the story of the jolly old man from the North Pole giving out presents to everyone, everywhere, is easily understood by children. So long as belief in his existence does not become the issue, and focus remains on the spirit of giving, then adults who work as Santa's helpers in department stores, or parents who don the hallowed costume at home, all of these are helping to instill generosity in the hearts and in the minds of the children who observe them. We must never forget, you see, that little ones learn by watching. As Comte Sponville has written, children imitate their parents. He says, all the world's a stage and living means acting, but he points out the roles and the players in this human comedy are not all equally good. We all pretend, he says, but it's not a game. The rules we follow are not there for our amusement. They make us and they make our children what we are, for better or for worse. And because of this, I think there is great wisdom in the old joke that describes the three ages of man as he believes in Santa Claus, he does not believe in Santa Claus, he is Santa Claus. In any case, that's the lesson for today. Don't lose sight of what is really important by arguing about beliefs that can neither be proven nor disproven. Instead, focus upon love and upon generosity, and you will know, I promise, you will know beyond any doubt why Jesus and Santa both matter. Merry Christmas.